The moment Chad signed that paper, he handed me the keys to his own destruction. I'm sitting here now, looking out from the CEO office that used to be his, thinking about how one signature can change everything. But let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story isn't about luck. It's about what happens when preparation meets stupidity. My name's Greg Patterson. I'm 47, been working at Darrell Systems for almost 2 decades now. Started as an operations manager when we had 12 people and dreams bigger than our budget. Worked my way up to COO while we grew into a 400-person tech company with clients across 3 states and contracts worth more than most people's mortgages. The day everything started going sideways, Chad Dunning walked into our quarterly review carrying a PowerPoint with the title Disrupting Our Disruption Strategy. I swear this kid had never met a buzzword he didn't like. Hair perfectly styled with enough gel to weatherproof a deck, tie loosened just enough to look innovative, strutting in like he'd invented the internet. His father Tobias had built this company from nothing, and now Chad thought he could run it because his last name was on the building. The kid had confidence, I'll give him that. Unfortunately, he also had the business sense of a goldfish. "We're restructuring our operational hierarchy," Chad announced to the room, voice carrying that fake enthusiasm they teach you in MBA school. Greg's moving to a more specialized role. Basement Operations Liaison. We need someone with his experience to really get hands-on with our foundational systems. Basement Operations Liaison. That's corporate speak for get lost, old man. Nobody in that conference room moved. You could have heard a pin drop in the next building. The board members just stared. Someone started reaching for a pen, then thought better of it. Even the office plant looked shocked. I looked around at these people I'd worked with through 3 acquisitions, 2 major system overhauls, and more late-night crisis calls than I care to remember. These weren't just coworkers. They were folks who'd trusted me when I said we could pull off the impossible. And somehow we always did. But here's the thing about guys like me, we don't blow up in meetings. We take notes. "Sounds good, Chad," I said, keeping my voice level. "When do you need me to transition?" He actually relaxed when I didn't fight him. Poor kid had no idea what was coming. Now, let me tell you about something that happened 2 months before Chad decided to play CEO. I was in the break room waiting for our coffee machine to produce something that resembled actual coffee when I heard voices in the hallway. Chad wasn't exactly known for keeping his voice down. "The old guard's gotta go," he was saying to someone. Patterson especially. "Guy's been here forever, thinks he knows everything. Once I move him out, I'll control the whole operational budget. Dad already gave me the green light. Just need to restructure his position, and the equity shift happens automatically." Laughter from whoever he was talking to. Probably one of the junior analysts who thought sucking up to the boss's son was a career strategy. Now, most people would get angry hearing something like that. Me? I left my coffee on the counter and went straight to my office. Time to dust off some old files. See, when you've been in this business as long as I have, you learn a few things. Always read the fine print. Always keep backups. And always have an insurance policy. 2 years ago, during a cash flow situation that had everyone sweating, I helped restructure our investment agreement with Crosswell Ventures. Everyone was too busy worrying about making payroll to pay attention to the legal language. But I paid attention. I wrote half of it, working with our legal counsel, a sharp guy named Tom who'd been practicing corporate law since before email existed. I tucked a little clause into Section 12C of our investor agreement. Nothing flashy, just a few lines buried in the middle of 40 pages of legal text. In the event that any listed key personnel is materially reassigned, terminated, or otherwise stripped of executive authority without a supermajority board vote, operational control reverts to Crosswell Ventures for an interim period not less than 18 months. Guess whose name was on that key personnel list? It took 4 rounds of revisions, 6 carefully worded emails, and 1 very expensive dinner to get that clause approved without raising any red flags. But there it was, signed and sealed and waiting. After I overheard Chad's little strategy session, I started documenting everything. Every email where he excluded me from decisions. Every meeting he scheduled without including operations. Every time he made changes to systems I'd spent years building without bothering to understand how they worked. I also made a phone call to Diane Crosswell, senior partner at Crosswell Ventures. We'd worked together during the restructuring, and I respected her approach to business. No nonsense, no games, just results. "Coffee next week?" I asked when she picked up. "About time," she said. "I was wondering when you'd call." We met at a place downtown, away from the office crowd. Diane showed up early, no assistant, drinking black coffee like it was fuel for a machine. "How bad is it?" she asked before I even sat down. Kid's about to trigger Section 12C, I told her. She nodded slowly. My legal team's been watching. We're ready to move when you give the word. Just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. Greg, she said, leaning forward. I didn't invest $800 million in this company to watch some trust fund kid run it into the ground. When he makes his move, you call me. That was all I needed to hear. Over the next few weeks, Chad got bolder. Started making unilateral decisions about vendor contracts. Canceled the employee development program I'd built over 5 years because it didn't align with our agile methodology. Began talking about pivoting to blockchain solutions, even though he couldn't explain what blockchain actually did. The guy was systematically dismantling everything that made the company work and calling it innovation. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and did my job, fixed the problems he created, maintained relationships with clients who were starting to ask questions about our new direction, kept the lights on while he played entrepreneur. Every mistake he made, I documented. Every decision that bypassed proper channels, I recorded. Every system he broke while trying to improve it, I fixed and logged the repair. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building a case for competence. The morning Chad made it official started like any other Tuesday, except my calendar had been updated overnight. New location for my office, B-level operations space. The basement, in other words. No meeting, no discussion, just a passive-aggressive scheduling change. By 8 a.m., my security badge no longer worked on the executive floor. By 8:15, my email access had been downgraded. By 8:30, some nervous intern was at my door with a clipboard and a printed map, like I might get lost finding my way around the building I'd helped design. "Mr. Patterson," the kid stammered, "Chad asked me to show you to your new workspace." I smiled at her. "That's okay, Bailey. I know where the basement is." She practically ran back to the elevator. The basement was exactly what you'd expect from a space that hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. Old printers that hadn't worked since Y2K. File cabinets with labels like Contracts 2015 and backup drives, format unknown. Fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. My new office was a folding table next to the water heater. One chair, no windows, and the smell of industrial cleaning supplies mixed with 20 years of forgotten dreams. But you know what? I'd worked in worse places. I set up my laptop, connected to the Wi-Fi using my phone as a hotspot since my network privileges had been downgraded, and got to work. Not on revenge, on documentation. I spent the morning cleaning up the mess Chad had already started making. 3 vendor contracts sitting in limbo because he'd demanded better terms without understanding what the original terms actually were. A client escalation about system downtime that happened because Chad had authorized a server migration during peak hours. The kind of stuff that keeps companies running, which apparently wasn't glamorous enough for his attention. Every email I sent got saved to my personal cloud storage. Every fix I made got documented with timestamps. Every problem I solved that Chad had created went into a file I labeled Operational Continuity Issues. Around 11, my laptop chimed with an official notification. Executive Access Update, Greg Patterson reassigned to Support Staff Level 3, effective immediately. There it was, black and white, with Chad's electronic signature at the bottom. Material reassignment of a key executive without board approval. The exact trigger language for Section 12C. I forwarded that email to Diane with no comment. Just the receipt. Her response came back in 30 seconds. Received. Stand by. While I was sitting in my basement office next to a water heater that sounded like it was planning to explode, Chad was upstairs telling anyone who'd listen about his leadership transition strategy. Word travels fast in a company this size, especially bad news. My phone started buzzing. Text messages from people I'd worked with for years. Is this for real? What the hell is Chad thinking? Do you need anything? I appreciated the support, but I just told everyone to keep their heads down and do their jobs. No point getting them involved in what was coming. What Chad didn't realize was that while he was celebrating his big power move, he'd just activated something that had been sitting dormant for 2 years. Like stepping on a landmine that takes a few seconds to go off. I used the rest of that day to tie up loose ends. Approved invoices that were waiting in my queue. Signed off on equipment purchases that our development team needed. Made sure the quarterly security audit was scheduled properly. The boring stuff that keeps a tech company from falling apart. Every action I took, I copied Diane's assistant. Not because I was trying to undermine Chad, but because operational control was about to shift, and Crosswell Ventures needed to understand what they were inheriting. That evening, I drove home to my place in the suburbs and had dinner with my wife, Sarah. She could tell something was up. Bad day? She asked over takeout Chinese. Interesting day, I said. Chad made his move. Sarah had been hearing about Chad's incompetence for months. She knew this was coming. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said. I'm going to let the contracts do the talking. She nodded. After 23 years of marriage, she understood how I operated. Plan, prepare, and let the other guy make the mistakes. The next morning brought the emergency board meeting that would change everything. The main conference room was buzzing by 9:30, even though the meeting wasn't until 10. Board members huddled in small groups, checking their phones and trying to figure out what was happening. Chad showed up 15 minutes late, carrying his usual protein shake and wearing a smile that said he owned the world. He took his seat at the head of the table like he'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. All right, everyone, he said, clapping his hands together. Time to make the restructuring official. HR has all the paperwork ready. The HR director stepped forward with a thick folder. Chad took it and flipped through the pages like he was ordering lunch. Just need to formalize Greg's new position, he continued, pulling out an expensive pen. This makes the operational transition complete. He signed with a flourish. First page, second page, each signature sealing his fate a little more. I waited until he was done, until HR had collected the papers and stepped back. Then I stood up. Thank you, Chad, I said. He looked surprised. You're welcome. I think this change will be good for everyone. I placed my phone on the table and hit speaker. The dial tone echoed through the room. 3 rings. 4. Then, Crosswell Ventures, Diane speaking. Hi, Diane, it's Greg. Her voice turned businesslike immediately. Is it official? Just signed and witnessed. Control event triggered at 9:57 a.m. Eastern. Understood, legal is moving now. I ended the call. The room had gone completely silent. You could have heard a mouse sneeze. What was that about? Chad asked, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. I sat back down and folded my hands. You just triggered a change of control clause in our investor agreement. Section 12C, the one that gives Crosswell Ventures operational authority when key personnel get demoted without proper board approval. Chad's face went from confused to worried in about 3 seconds. What clause? Nobody told me about any clause. It's been in the agreement for 2 years, I said calmly. You remember the Crosswell agreement, right? The one that funded our expansion. The board members started frantically pulling up documents on their tablets. Someone dropped their coffee cup. The general counsel looked like he was having flashbacks to law school. But nobody objected to the restructuring, Chad said, looking around for support. That means consent, right? Silence isn't consent, I replied. It's just silence. And what you just documented with your signature is an unauthorized executive change. That's when the conference phone rang. Incoming call from Tobias Dunning, Chad's father dialing in from his recovery. Perfect timing. Put him through, said the general counsel. Is everyone there? Tobias's voice came through the speaker, scratchy but clear. Yes, sir, I said. Greg, you're on this call? I am. I understand my son made some organizational changes. That's correct. Signed and executed this morning. Long pause, then, show me what he signed. The general counsel held up the papers to the camera. Another pause, longer this time. He signed what? Tobias's voice had gotten very quiet. The restructuring authorization, Chad said quickly. Just like we discussed, Dad. Remember the operational efficiency plan? Son, Tobias said, and I could hear 25 years of building a company in his voice. Do you have any idea what you just did? Chad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. This clause was put in place during our 2023 refinancing, the general counsel said carefully. You approved the language personally, Mr. Dunning. Because it was supposed to protect us from hostile takeovers, Tobias said. Not from my own son making unauthorized personnel decisions. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things permanently. Effective immediately, Tobias continued. Chad steps back from all executive functions. Crosswell Ventures assumes operational control per the terms of Section 12C. Dad, you can't just, I can and I am, Tobias cut him off. You moved against a key executive without board approval. You triggered a clause you didn't bother to understand. And now you've handed our primary investor control of the company I spent my life building. Chad tried to speak again, but no words came. Greg, Tobias said. Yes, sir, send me that clause. Direct to my personal email. Already there. Good. The line went dead. Nobody moved for 10 full seconds. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and looked at Chad. No anger, no satisfaction, just the quiet understanding that competence had finally won. The meeting's over, I said, and walked out. The real show started the next morning when Diane Crosswell walked through our lobby like she owned the place, which legally speaking she now did. I was already at my desk, still in the basement, but not for much longer. when I got the text from our security guard. Executive visitor incoming. Looks serious. Diane didn't wait to be announced or escorted. She took the elevator straight to the 16th floor, walked into the main conference room, and set up shop. Black suit, leather briefcase, the kind of presence that makes people straighten their ties without being asked. The board had called an emergency session to figure out damage control. How do you explain to your golf buddies that you just lost control of your own company? They were all there by 9 a.m., huddled around coffee and panic. Diane didn't knock. She opened the door and walked in like she had every right to, because the paperwork said she did. Chad was pacing near the windows, probably practicing his speech about how this was all a misunderstanding. He froze when she entered. "Gentlemen," Diane said, setting her briefcase on the conference table. "And Greg." She clicked it open and pulled out a folder. No laptop, no fancy presentation. Just paper, signatures, and the weight of $800 million in investment capital. This is formal notification that operational control transferred to Crosswell Ventures yesterday at 2:14 p.m. Eastern per Section 12C of our investment agreement. She didn't pause for questions. And this, she continued, producing a second document, is notice that Chad Dunning's executive authority is terminated due to unauthorized personnel decisions and violation of fiduciary protocols. She turned and looked directly at Chad. "You're no longer acting CEO. You don't access executive systems, authorize expenditures, or represent this company in any capacity." Chad's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Diane wasn't finished. "We've also reviewed your internal communications, including the email where you wrote, 'Time to clean house and show these old-timers who's running things now.' That message thread is with our legal team." Stewart from Strategic Planning winced. The general counsel looked like he was calculating retirement dates. Chad finally found his voice. "You went through my company email? Company email discussing unauthorized personnel changes and promising equity redistribution to your college friends?" "Yes, we reviewed it thoroughly." She turned to me. "Greg, we need interim leadership during the stabilization period. I'm appointing you acting CEO with full operational authority under Section 12C subsection E." The room held its breath. Nobody objected. Nobody dared. I nodded once. "I accept." Diane gestured toward the head of the table, the chair Chad had occupied like borrowed furniture. I walked over and sat down. The leather was familiar, comfortable. It remembered me better than it remembered him. Chad didn't move from his spot by the windows, just stood there, arms at his sides, face pale as printer paper. Not fired exactly, just suddenly irrelevant in a room he thought he controlled. I opened the folder Diane had placed in front of me. Top sheet, Executive Authority Transfer, Darrell Systems, Inc. Below that, copies of every email, every authorization, every signature that had led us to this moment. Someone whispered, "How long does this last?" 18 months, Diane replied without looking up from her notes. Minimum stabilization period as specified in the agreement. 18 months to prove the company was worth saving. 18 months to undo whatever damage had already been done. 18 months to show that experience and competence could beat connections and ego. I picked up the pen beside the folder and signed my name on the authorization line. The ink felt permanent. After everyone filed out, I sat alone in that conference room for a few minutes. Not celebrating, not gloating, just thinking about what came next. Getting the job back was one thing. Proving it was worth having was another. Over the next few days, things settled into a new rhythm. Chad quietly cleared out his corner office and left the building. No dramatic exit, no farewell email. Just gone, like a problem that solved itself. Word around the industry was he'd started a consulting firm called Disruption Dynamics. Good luck with that. The real work started immediately. I moved back to my actual office on the executive floor and got to work fixing things. First priority was damage control with our clients. 3 major accounts were asking questions about our leadership transition. 2 vendors had suspended credit terms because of Chad's payment restructuring experiment. Our employee satisfaction scores had dropped 15 points in 2 months. I spent my first week back making phone calls, explaining to clients that the brief period of innovative management approaches was over, reassuring vendors that our payment terms were back to normal, meeting with department heads who'd been cut out of decision-making while Chad played CEO. The response was like watching a plant get water after a drought. Our lead developer, a sharp woman named Lisa, who'd been looking at job postings for weeks, came by my office. "Are we back to normal?" she asked. "Better than normal," I told her. "We're back to functional." She smiled. Good. I was starting to polish my resume. I put her in charge of reviewing all the system changes Chad had authorized. Half of them needed to be rolled back immediately. The other half needed to be studied by people who actually understood how our infrastructure worked. The operations team started talking about long-term projects again. The sales department stopped apologizing to clients for things they didn't understand. The IT group finally got approval for the security upgrades they'd been requesting for months. But the biggest change was in meetings. Instead of Chad's buzzword presentations about synergistic paradigm shifts, we talked about actual problems and realistic solutions. Instead of revolutionary changes every week, we focused on steady improvements that actually worked. 3 weeks in, we landed a contract that had been stalled for months. A mid-size manufacturing company that needed a complete inventory management overhaul. They'd been hesitant to commit because of our organizational uncertainty, but now they felt confident in our stability. The project was worth $2.3 million over 18 months. More importantly, it was the kind of complex, long-term work that proved we could handle serious business. I thought about sending Chad a copy of the contract. Then I decided he probably had enough reminders that competence pays better than chaos. A month after the transition, Diane scheduled her first quarterly review. We met in my office, the real one, not the basement folding table, to go over numbers. Revenue's up 8%, she said, flipping through reports. Client retention back to normal. Employee satisfaction recovering. Still some cleanup to do, I told her. Chad made promises we can't keep and started projects we can't finish. But the foundation's solid. That's why you're here, she said. To remind everyone what solid looks like. She closed the folder and looked at me directly. The board's asking about permanent arrangements. Tobias wants to step back, focus on recovery and family. You interested in making this official? I've been thinking about that question for weeks. CEO meant more responsibility, more pressure, more time away from the work I actually enjoyed. But it also meant ensuring that what happened with Chad couldn't happen again. Let me finish the cleanup first, I said. Make sure we're really stable. Then we can talk about the future. She nodded. Fair enough. But Greg, you've earned this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. After she left, I walked through the office floors, checking in with teams and projects. The energy was different now. People looked up when I passed, asked questions about their work, talked about ideas for improvement. This was what I'd been protecting for 20 years. Not just jobs or profits, but the idea that good work mattered. 6 months later, we had our first all-hands meeting since the transition. 400 people packed into the main auditorium, and for the first time in years, nobody looked like they were planning their escape route. I stood at the podium looking out at faces I'd known for decades. Some had been here since the early days when we celebrated landing a $50,000 contract. Others were newer, hired during our growth years when we thought the good times would never end. All of them had lived through Chad's brief reign of confusion and come out the other side. I want to talk about what we've accomplished, I began, clicking to the first slide. Not because I love presentations, but because numbers don't lie. Revenue up 18% over 6 months. Client retention at 94%, highest in company history. Employee satisfaction back above industry average. Applause, but not the polite kind you get at corporate events. Real appreciation from people who'd watched their workplace nearly get destroyed by incompetence. But more than that, I continued. We've remembered what we're good at. Solving problems that matter. Building systems that work. Taking care of clients who trust us with their business. More applause. I saw Lisa from development nodding. Tom from operations giving a thumbs up. These weren't just employees anymore. They were partners in rebuilding something worth having. After the meeting, I walked back to my office thinking about phone calls I needed to make. 3 more client prospects wanted proposals. 2 of our major accounts were asking about expanding their contracts. The kind of problems you want to have. My assistant knocked and stuck her head in. Diane Crosswell's here to see you. Diane walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder thick enough to use as a weapon. She set 1 cup on my desk and settled into the chair across from me. Quarterly numbers look good, she said, sipping her coffee. Better than good, actually. You've exceeded every metric in the stabilization plan. Team effort, I said. Amazing what happens when people can focus on work instead of wondering if their boss knows what he's doing. She laughed. Speaking of bosses, we need to talk about permanent arrangements. Tobias is officially stepping down as CEO next month. Board's unanimous about offering you the position. I'd been expecting this conversation for weeks, but hearing it out loud still felt significant. CEO meant more than just a title change. It meant taking responsibility for 400 people's livelihoods, for client relationships worth millions, for a company that had taken 25 years to build. What about the 18-month clause? I asked. Fulfilled as of today, she said, sliding the folder across my desk. Company's demonstrably stable, revenues growing, all contractual obligations met. Crosswell's ready to transfer majority control back to the original ownership structure. I opened the folder. Stock transfer documents, board resolutions, employment agreements. Everything needed to make the transition official. There's one condition, Diane continued. New governance structure. Real board oversight, not just rubber stamps. Independent directors with actual authority. No more family appointments without demonstrated competence. What about Chad? Chad retains his minority stake as Tobias's heir, but no operational authority. He can attend shareholder meetings and collect dividends, but he doesn't get to play CEO again. I signed the papers without hesitation. The company needed protection from future Chads, and this structure would provide it. 3 weeks later, we held the official transition ceremony. Nothing fancy, just a board meeting where Tobias formally stepped down and I officially became CEO. He looked healthier than he had in months, probably because he wasn't worrying about his son destroying his life's work anymore. 25 years I spent building this place, he said during his farewell remarks. I'm proud to leave it in hands I trust completely. After the meeting, he pulled me aside for a private conversation. I owe you an apology, he said. I knew Chad wasn't ready, but I thought I could guide him through it. Pride, I suppose. Wanting the family name to continue. You don't owe me anything, I told him. You gave me a chance 20 years ago when nobody else would. That's worth more than any apology. He nodded, then smiled. You know, Chad's actually doing well with his consulting firm. Turns out he's good at talking to clients about change management, just not so good at actually managing change. Maybe that's where he belonged all along, I said. Maybe so. The months that followed were the most satisfying of my career. We landed our biggest contract ever, a 5-year enterprise software development deal worth $12 million. Our employee retention rate hit an all-time high. 3 industry publications recognized us for operational excellence. But the moment that really mattered happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was walking through the development floor when I overheard 2 junior programmers talking. Remember when that Chad guy was running things? One said. What a disaster that was. Yeah, the other replied. Good thing Greg was here to fix it. Guy really knows what he's doing. They didn't know I was listening, which made it better. Recognition from people who'd lived through the chaos and appreciated the stability. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah at our favorite restaurant downtown. She'd been watching me work through the transition for months, probably wondering if the stress was worth it. So how does it feel? She asked over dessert. Being the official boss instead of just the guy who actually ran things? Honestly, about the same, I said. Same problems, same solutions, same people counting on me to get it right. But now you get paid for the responsibility you were already carrying. True. And now I can make sure it doesn't happen again. She raised her wine glass. To competence finally getting its due. We toasted, and I thought about everything that had led to this moment. Chad's arrogance. Section 12C waiting in the files like a loaded trap. Diane's phone call that changed everything. The slow work of rebuilding trust and proving that experience matters. Looking back, people sometimes ask if I planned the whole thing. Did I know Chad would be stupid enough to trigger the clause? Did I manipulate him into making the moves that brought him down? The truth is simpler than conspiracy. I didn't plan Chad's downfall. I just prepared for the possibility that incompetence might try to replace competence. And when it happened, I was ready. That's not revenge. That's just good business sense. You spend 20 years learning how systems work, how people work, how companies succeed or fail. You develop instincts about what's sustainable and what's not. When someone threatens something you've helped build, something that employs hundreds of people and serves clients who depend on you, you protect it. Some people call that playing politics. I call it taking responsibility. Chad thought leadership was about making bold moves and disrupting established patterns. What he never understood was that real leadership is about making the right moves consistently, even when they're not bold, especially when they're not bold. The best revenge isn't dramatic or personal. It's simply being better at the job than the person who tried to take it from you. It's proving that competence matters more than connections, that experience beats enthusiasm, that building something lasting requires patience and skill. Chad handed me the keys to his own destruction the moment he signed those papers, but I didn't destroy him. I just let him destroy himself while I cleaned up the mess. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Justice doesn't need to be cruel. It just needs to be thorough. And sometimes, the most thorough justice is simply doing the job right.